Draik and his companions approach the helmsman, where drunken crowds are already spilling out the doors. Humans and Xenos alike, stripped of any hope of plundering the Blackstone and terrified by the unfolding events, have given themselves over to unrestrained drinking and brawling. Draik steps carefully over bodies and puddles, unable to distinguish wine from blood, noting that despair and fear have erased the boundaries between the species. The group is forced to carve a path with rifle butts, shouldering their way into the overcrowded, stifling hall that resembles an engine room. Void vermin screech as they circle above the patrons' heads. The owner, the cyborg Gatto, slams a customer's head against the counter with one hand, while simultaneously pouring drinks with his multiple mechanical arms. Odus spots the Ratlings in one of the dark booths. Draik approaches the table where Rain and Rouse sit, filthy, clad in tattered uniforms and barely reaching his waist. At the sight of Draik, they leap up, salute, and attempt to straighten themselves out, introducing themselves as Thaddeus's personal advisors. Rouse offers Draik his glass, which is swimming with grease and scales, while Rain greedily devours scraps from the table. The Ratlings proudly recount how they guided His Magnificence Thaddeus to the Crucible itself so he could seize control of the fortress. Draik is wary of their behavior. The Ratlings are unsurprised by his appearance, claiming they were expecting him as only Captain Draik possesses the class to venture down there. They claim to hold a map in their heads that allows passage through the aberration, zones where walls and floors are constantly shifting, melting, and collapsing. When asked why Thaddeus is currently preaching outside rather than occupying the Crucible, the Ratlings lie, claiming the priest decided to first eradicate heresy on Precipice Station itself. At that moment, the bar is shaken by a powerful tremor from the Blackstone's weapon fire. Patrons fall, thermal shielding fails, but then the drinking resumes. The Ratlings warn that the depths are teeming with heretics and demand that Draik provide a strong escort of his house guardsmen. Realizing he has no army, Draik evades a direct answer and arranges a meeting at his ship in 2 hours. He asks about payment. Feigning patriotism, the Ratlings ask for only a single souvenir, a sacred relic from the Crucible as a keepsake. Draik agrees to the deal. The Ratlings leave, vanishing into the smoke. Left alone, Draik's companions discuss their lack of soldiers. Odus reminds them she is a deserter. Grek refuses to summon his kin, and Isola suggests simply flying away. Draik categorically refuses to leave the station a beggar. Suddenly, a shout erupts from the doorway. The priests have seized the proctors, the local peacekeepers. The crowd rushes for the exit in panic, realizing that law and order on the station has collapsed. Isola insists they must speak with Thaddeus before a massacre begins. Draik, scanning images of pages from Thaddeus's holy book via his augmetic eye, finds the specific passage regarding the Crucible prophecy. He stands abruptly, declaring that he knows how to proceed and that he has a plan.
By the time Draik's group reaches the Dromplatz trade hall, the battle has already ended. Dozens of charred Bulgrin bodies lie scattered among broken counters, while the mob of fanatics, now grown to an immense size, chants words of adoration. In the center of the hall towers a gigantic structure, welded from wreckage into the shape of a crude imperial aquila. Standing on the back of the metal eagle is Thaddeus the Purifier, with Vaughn by his side. Isola notices that cages have been built into the eagle's wings, imprisoning bound proctors, the station's last representatives of the law. Fires burn everywhere, threatening to ignite the fuel reserves. Draik, recalling images from Thaddeus's sacred tome, the Liber Eudox, decides to exploit the priest's fanaticism. He remembers a sketch of a faceless prophet with a wounded hand. As he runs, Draik tears the bandages from his cut hand and waves it furiously to worsen the bleeding. With his bloody hand, he pushes through the crowd to the rear of the dais and begins to climb. Fanatics armed with flamers turn toward him, but Thaddeus spots Draik and invites him to ascend, declaring that the path to ascension is open. Vaughn helps Draik reach the summit, hauling him onto the platform with her sinewy grip. Thaddeus is in a state of ecstasy, declaring that he finally sees his mission clearly. He must find the prophet who will deliver them all from heresy. Draik attempts to convince the priest that burning the proctors will lead to chaos and begs him to stop. At that moment, Thaddeus's gaze falls upon Drake's profusely bleeding hand. The priest freezes. He shows the hand to Vaughn and announces to the crowd that this is no coincidence. Thaddeus proclaims that Draik is the Anointed One, the Eye of Hermes foretold by Saint Corval, the very prophet destined to unite with the Blackstone Fortress. Draik, playing along with the madness, feigns ignorance, but confirms his intention to journey into the fortress. Thaddeus falls to his knees, acknowledging Draik as the Chosen One, and promises that his entire army of fanatics will serve as Drake's honor guard on this crusade. Draik, believing he has managed to save the captives, asks Thaddeus if his work at the Dromplatz is finished. Thaddeus answers in the affirmative, declaring that since the Anointed One has appeared, the cleansing is complete. He exchanges a glance with Vaughn, and they shout in unison, "We have been purified!" The crowd takes up the cry. At a signal from Thaddeus, hundreds of fanatics simultaneously open fire with their flamers upon the cages at the eagle's base. The proctors are burned alive in an instant. Odus and Isola attempt to rush to their aid in horror, but the flames are too intense. The entire metal structure begins to melt and collapse from the monstrous heat. Draik screams that they will all burn, but Thaddeus, looking at him with adoration, replies that the Emperor will not permit the death of the Anointed One. The Janus Draik shoots out the burning supports with his rifle, creating an escape route. Draik, Thaddeus, Vaughn, and the others slide down the crumbling back of the eagle, landing on the floor amidst burning debris. Dragging himself from the rubble, Draik watches as Thaddeus and Vaughn emerge from the fire. They are burned, their clothes smoldering, yet they seem oblivious to the pain, gazing at Draik with fanatical rapture. Isola, her face blackened with soot, asks Draik in horror what he has done. Thaddeus declares that this is only the beginning of great deeds.
The Archivist establishes contact with Quintus, not through voice, but via thought, penetrating directly into his veins through the bony protrusion on his wrist. Quintus sits in a brightly lit, yet cluttered chamber aboard his employer's ship, fighting back the nausea induced by the telepathic link. Mountains of scrap are piled around him. Engine parts, weapons, scientific equipment, and strange glass terrariums housing writhing tendrils that stretch toward him across the floor. The guards who admitted him have vanished, leaving him in solitude. Trying to mask his fear, Quintus asks if he must continue to remain by Captain Drake's side. The employer's reply blooms within his mind as a warm, almost pleasant sensation. The Archivist confirms the order and reveals the true objective. Quintus must remain with Draik until the expedition reaches the aberration zone at the heart of the Blackstone Fortress. The Archivist's priority is ensuring the Ratlings reach that point. Draik serves merely as a vehicle for their delivery and protection. Once the objective is achieved, Quintus must activate a powerful yet discreet explosive device to kill Draik, preventing him from entering. Quintus laughs nervously and refuses, declaring that he is no killer and has no intention of flying into a den of heretics.
In response, the Archivist explains that the growth on Quintus's arm is a nebulium coil, a psychic resonator. The creature activates the device, and Quintus is pierced by unbearable agony. He watches as the bony growth creeps up his arm, transmuting flesh into bone. The Archivist issues an ultimatum. He cannot appear on Precipice himself, as his species would incite hostility, so he is forced to employ primitive agents. The coil is programmed such that if Quintus strays more than a few hundred feet from Draik, it will kill him in torment. Quintus screams in pain, clutching his head. The pain ceases as abruptly as it began. The employer promises that upon success, he will remove the implant, surgically alter Quintus's appearance and DNA beyond recognition, and extract him from the dying station. Broken and cornered, Quintus notices a shadow on the wall cast by the creature behind the screen. The silhouette is massive, distorted, and resembles a quadrupedal creature clad in armor. Quintus asks who he is. The creature replies that it is the past, and the fortress belongs to it. The Archivist is certain Draik will take Quintus along, as pride will not allow the rogue trader to travel without a servant. To Quintus's query regarding motives and riches, the creature responds that there are many forms of wealth and many kinds of pain, after which the shadow vanishes.
News of the execution of the proctors spreads through the station faster than Janus Draik can return to the vanguard. The news so shocks the inhabitants of Precipice that a strange, tense silence reigns everywhere, and captains hastily recall their crews, sensing impending disaster. Draik strides along the Selsam Gate mooring boom, ignoring the staring crowds and the column of burned fanatics trailing behind him. Odus remarks that the mob believes Draik ordered the killings, but he merely waves it off, declaring that they are leaving, and heads toward the silver prow of his ship. Rain and Rouse await them at the boarding ramp, greeting Draik with an absurdly complex and ridiculous series of bows and salutes. Draik breezes past them and orders his valet, Quintus, to assemble the servitors and clear all cabins to accommodate Thaddeus's followers. Quintus looks even more terrified and jittery than before, attempting to object that there are too many people, but Draik cuts him off sharply, stating there are exactly as many as needed. The loading begins. Quintus and the servitors shove missionaries into compartments, shifting furniture and cargo. The luxurious interior of the Vanguard instantly fills with the scent of aromatic oils, burnt skin, and unwashed bodies, while the silence is broken by raspy prayers and the clatter of iron-shod boots. Draik feels as though his ship has been invaded, yet he is pleased to have his own army to field against the cults of the Blackstone. Draik ascends to the command deck and straps himself into his command throne. Odus activates the flight systems. Screens flicker to life, illuminating the alcoves, and cogitators begin spitting out ribbons of data. Isola and the Kroot, Grek, silently take their stations. The Ratlings, finding themselves in such a setting for the first time, stumble around, gawking in amazement at the vaulted ceiling, gilded furniture, and fluted columns. Odus makes a snide comment regarding the situation, reminding Draik of his lost fortune, but he habitually ignores her lack of manners. He orders the Ratlings to strap in at the rear of the bridge and announces that they are heading for the Stygian aperture, warning that the flight will not be smooth. Watching Isola issue orders to the servitors and check the systems with practiced ease, Draik decides that her demands for partnership were a temporary madness and that she will soon come to her senses. Isola intercepts his gaze and sternly warns him that this is the last time she works in this capacity. From now on, they will either be equals or she will walk. Draik remains silent, unwilling to argue. Odus asks if they are ready. Draik looks over his crew. The Ratlings are dividing up chunks of meat. Grek is asleep under a hide. Isola is working, and the terrified Quintus has hidden himself in a cabin. Draik feels an incredible lightness, realizing that for the first time, he is flying into the Blackstone, free of his family's expectations, with a simple goal: to get rich. He smiles, leans back in his chair, and gives the command to descend.
The vanguard makes its final approach to the Blackstone Fortress, passing a debris field of fuel canisters and stripped ship hulks. Draik unexpectedly asks Odus and Isola if they see it. Odus, occupied with piloting, does not hear him, and Isola does not understand what he is talking about. Draik is not looking out the viewport, but rather inside the command bridge, where a strange substance hangs in the air right before his eyes. It seems to him that he sees pink and red fluid, or inflamed skin, which ripples and obstructs his view. When he tries to look at Isola, the spot moves with his gaze, obscuring her face. Draik wipes his eye, thinking he is dazzled by a lamp, but the vision becomes clearer. Within the center of the red, boiling mass, a vague, fragmented face emerges, as if someone is watching him through faceted glass. Suddenly, Draik is seized by inexplicable panic and a sense of urgency bordering on terror. Instinctively, he reaches for the holster of his splinter pistol. Isola, noticing his movement, grabs her weapon as well. The distorted face in the vision draws closer, the light becomes blinding, and a sharp pain pierces Drake's skull. He jerks in his command throne, gasping for air. Realizing that the source of the pain is his augmetic eye, Draik unscrews the device's casing and yanks it out of the socket. In that same instant, the light, the face, and the pain vanish. Holding the gilded implant in his hand, Draik explains to a worried Isola that it is a defect in the lens or the processor. Isola suggests finding a tech priest for repairs, but Draik refuses, reminding her that it is an ancient and irreplaceable gift. He checks the mechanism, turns the lens, hears a click, and finding no external damage, carefully inserts the eye back into the socket and locks it in place. The pain returns instantly, accompanied by a dazzling red glow. The face is gone, but in its place, Draik sees a new, terrifyingly realistic hallucination. He looks at Isola, but instead of the woman in the chair beside him, he sees her figure falling through an endless void. He watches as she tumbles downward, trying to grab onto something, before striking an invisible surface with massive force. Her body is torn in half, and blood floods everything. Unable to bear the sight, Draik rips the ocular out again and deactivates it. He lies to Isola, claiming the device is causing simple static, trying to hide his anxiety. The vision of Isola's death forces him to contemplate her fate. He tells her there is no shame in serving a great house, attempting to dissuade her from the idea of independence. Isola counters, asserting that she has seen who survives in this galaxy, and it is not the servants. She reiterates her condition: equal partnership in the new House Draik. Draik calls this absurd, unwilling to violate the hierarchy. Odus interrupts their argument, pointing to the viewing screen. The vanguard has flown up close to the Blackstone Fortress, and now its dark, geometric mass fills the entire view, blocking out the stars. Odus draws attention not to the station itself, but to the entry point, the Stygian aperture. The passage, usually dangerous due to debris, now looks like a death trap. Dozens of dead void ships drift and tumble slowly around the opening, dragging clouds of wreckage with them. Draik, confident in his pilot's skills, orders her to continue the approach. The ship loops toward the junk-clogged entrance, but in Drake's mind's eye, The image of Isola falling into the darkness remains. Tech priest Daedalosus concludes his prayer in the cramped tribolic chapel of his research vessel and turns to his guests. Seated in a semicircle before him are experienced salvage captains and data merchants, among whom a Xenos stands out, a Jakaro weaponsmith. The creature behaves calmly, arms crossed and sipping altar wine held in its foot, while the humans are visibly nervous. The ship shudders from another tremor caused by the geomagnetic storm. Adepts bustle around, filling the room with incense, and standing next to the hagioscope that offers a view of the laboratory is Daedalosus's friend and colleague, cryptogeologist Magos Mepsus, whose lower body is a tangle of writhing mechanical tentacles. Daedalosus begins his speech, apologizing for bringing outsiders into a sacred space, but emphasizing the gravity of the moment. Salvage Captain Liss and her husband Took express the general despair. They are stranded on Precipice. The proctors have been burned by the ecclesiarchy. The Blackstone has been seized, and their hopes for riches have collapsed. They feel like idiots for believing in easy profit. Daedalosus interrupts their complaints, explaining the physics of the phenomena. The intensifying gravity and their fatigue are caused by changes within the fortress itself. The tech priest leads his guests to a workbench holding a container with a black polyhedral stone, Noctilith, or pariah stone. He explains that this is the primary material of the fortress. He then demonstrates a second container, covered by a cloth. When Daedalosus removes the cover, the guests see not a stone, but a pulsating lump of flesh resembling a rabid crustacean, furiously attacking the glass. Daedalosus explains that the heretics have reversed the stone's polarity through bloody rituals, infusing it with warp energy. Now, the Blackstone is transforming into a sentient, planet-sized weapon, capable of destroying entire systems. Realizing the scale of the threat, the captains are horrified. Daedalosus outlines his plan. The only chance to save the Imperium is to send word of the crisis. To do this, every flight-capable ship on Precipice must launch simultaneously. He coldly recites the calculations. 90% of the fleet will perish under the fortress's guns or in the debris field. Of the remaining 10%, only half will manage to break through the Oort cloud. The total chance of mission success is 5%. The captains are shocked by this suicidal mathematics. At that moment, the infected shard in the container begins to vibrate with a deafening whistle. The glass melts and a warp entity bursts forth. It attacks Mepsus with lightning speed, latching onto his throat. Blood splatters the hagioscope. Daedalosus grabs his gamma pistol but hesitates, calculating the risks. A shot would kill his friend and breach the ship's hull. Liss draws a las pistol, but cannot find a clear aim either. Mepsus falls, trying to tear the creature away with his tentacles, but the entity is already infecting his flesh. Suddenly, the screeching stops. The Jakaro, who has been watching calmly the entire time, utilizes a miniature digital weapon and, with a single precise shot, turns the warp beast into a pile of ash without harming anything else. The ape nods to Daedalosus and returns to its wine. Daedalosus rushes to Mepsus, but sees the wound is already festering and turning black with corruption. Realizing his friend cannot be saved and the risk of infection is too great, he fires his gamma pistol, incinerating the upper half of the Magos's body. After a brief pause to regain his self-control, Daedalosus addresses the captains again through the glass. Liss and Took, having witnessed the horror,
and realize the hopelessness of their situation, exchange glances, and agree to the suicidal breakout plan. The Jacaro weaponsmith grunts and finishes the wine.